So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, close your eyes and let's begin the first story. Story 1. My CB radio started picking up voices that shouldn't exist. I've been driving trucks for 15 years now, hauling freight across the country, and I thought I'd seen everything the road could throw at me. Late night drives through desolate stretches of highway, weird weather, strange people at truck stops. None of it fazed me anymore. But what happened on Interstate 80 through Nevada last month has me questioning everything I thought I knew about being alone on the road. I was 3 days into a cross-country haul carrying electronics from California to Pennsylvania. The load was good money, but it meant pushing through some of the most isolated stretches of highway in the country. Nevada's I-80 is particularly brutal. Mile after mile of nothing but sagebrush and mountains, with truck stops sometimes 100 miles apart. It's the kind of emptiness that makes you appreciate having a good CB radio for company. I've always been a CB guy. Channel 19 is like a lifeline out there. Truckers sharing information about road conditions, speed traps, good places to eat. The chatter keeps you awake and reminds you that you're not completely alone in the world. My handle is Midnight Express, and over the years, I've made friends with voices I've never met face to face. It was around 2 in the morning when things started getting strange. I was maybe 50 miles east of Winnemucca, running through a particularly desolate stretch where the mountains rise up like black walls on either side of the highway. The CB had been quiet for the last hour, unusual for Channel 19, but not unheard of in the middle of nowhere. That's when I realized the visions were following a pattern. Every phantom sighting had been something that required me to slow down or stop. A broken down car, a person needing help, an obstacle in the road. And each time, I'd reacted exactly as any responsible driver would. I'd slowed down for the walking woman, swerved for the deer, hit the brakes for the overturned truck. My headlights weren't just showing me things that weren't there. They were showing me things designed to make me react in specific ways. The understanding came with a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Something was using my own safety instincts against me, showing me situations that demanded immediate response, forcing me to brake and swerve and stop on what should have been a routine drive through familiar territory. But why? I got my answer just outside of Lexington, Kentucky, as I was descending a long grade toward the city lights spread out in the valley below. My headlights illuminated a massive accident scene ahead. Multiple vehicles, emergency responders, flares marking off lanes. It looked like a major pileup, the kind of scene where traffic would be backed up for miles. But this time, I didn't immediately hit the brakes. Instead, I lifted my foot off the accelerator and tried to use my CB radio to confirm what I was seeing. Any southbound traffic on I-75 near Lexington? How's the road looking ahead? Southbound truck, this is Blue Moon, running about 5 miles behind you. Roads clear all the way into the city. No accidents, no delays. I looked ahead at the phantom accident scene, now close enough that I could see individual emergency workers moving around the wreckage. But another truck driver, just 5 miles behind me, was reporting clear roads. That's when I understood what was really happening. The phantom visions weren't random hallucinations. They were tests. Each one had presented me with a situation that required an immediate decision. Brake, swerve, stop, react. And each time, I'd made the right choice. But what would have happened if I'd made the wrong choice? What if I'd ignored the deer and hit it? What if I'd failed to stop for the overturned truck? The accident scene ahead was the final test, and this time I knew what the right answer was. I maintained my speed and drove straight through the phantom wreckage. My truck passed through emergency vehicles like they were made of mist, through overturned cars and scattered debris that offered no resistance at all. For a moment, I was surrounded by the illusion of chaos and destruction. Emergency lights flashing through my cab, the phantom sound of sirens and radio chatter. Then I was through, and the highway ahead was clear and normal. Or had something else been testing my reactions, my judgment, my ability to make life or death decisions in split-second situations? I called my wife from the truck stop and told her about the phantom sightings. She was concerned, suggested I see a doctor when I got home, worried that I might be developing a medical condition that was affecting my vision. But deep down, I didn't think this was a medical problem. I thought about all the stories I'd heard over the years from other drivers, tales of strange sightings on lonely highways, of trucks that seemed to be testing their drivers, of roads that showed you things that weren't there. Most drivers dismissed these stories as fatigue-induced hallucinations, tricks of tired minds and overworked eyes. But what if they were something more? What if certain stretches of highway, certain trucks, certain drivers were being evaluated by something that needed to know how they'd react under pressure? The rest of my trip to Louisville passed without incident. My headlights showed me exactly what they should. The road ahead, other traffic, normal roadside features. Nothing that wasn't really there. But I've never forgotten that night in the Tennessee mountains, and I've never completely trusted my headlights since. Because now I know that sometimes they show you more than just what's ahead on the highway. Sometimes they show you tests disguised as emergencies. Situations designed to measure your character when no one else is watching. And sometimes the most important thing isn't what you see in your headlights. It's what you choose to do about it. Story 2. I found a logbook in my cab that wasn't mine, documenting trips I'd never taken. Every commercial driver keeps a logbook. It's federal law. Hours of service regulations require detailed documentation of driving time, on-duty time, rest periods, and vehicle inspections. After 15 years of trucking, maintaining my logbook had become as automatic as checking my mirrors or adjusting my seat, which is why finding a second logbook in my cab was so disturbing. I discovered it on a Monday morning in Denver, getting ready to start a run to Phoenix. I was doing my pre-trip inspection, checking cargo securement, going through my usual routine when I opened the storage compartment behind my driver's seat to grab a pen. There, next to my own logbook with its familiar blue cover, was another logbook I'd never seen before. This one had a black cover, slightly worn, with the same federal motor carrier regulations printed on the front. But it wasn't mine. I picked it up and flipped through the pages, expecting to find it empty, or maybe containing entries from whoever had driven this truck before me. Instead, I found detailed logs written in handwriting that looked exactly like mine. The entries documented trips I'd never taken, according to this phantom logbook. But 3 weeks ago, I'd been running furniture from North Carolina to Texas. The dates were specific. The mileage calculations were accurate. Even the fuel purchases were logged with precise dollar amounts and locations. But I hadn't made that trip. The logbook showed that yesterday, while I thought I'd been resting at home in Oklahoma. I'd apparently driven from Portland to Salt Lake City, carrying automotive parts for a delivery scheduled this morning. According to my real logbook, my actual logbook, I'd spent Sunday at home watching football and doing laundry. But according to this second logbook, I'd been driving all night through mountain passes, dealing with snow conditions and chain requirements. The phantom logbook included weather notes, fuel stop locations, even observations about road conditions and traffic patterns. Whoever had made these entries knew the routes intimately, wrote with the same abbreviations and notations I used, even had the same complaints about construction zones that I would have made. I compared the handwriting more carefully. If I hadn't known better, I would have sworn I'd written every entry myself, but I hadn't. I called my dispatcher to ask about the Los Angeles to Seattle run. According to company records, that load had been hauled by another driver, someone I'd never met. When I described the details from the phantom logbook, pickup time, delivery address, cargo description, everything matched the actual shipment perfectly. "How did you know about Johnson's load?" the dispatcher asked. "That was 3 weeks ago, and it wasn't even your division." I couldn't explain how I knew, because I didn't understand it myself. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with the phantom logbook. Every morning, I'd check for new entries, and every morning there would be fresh logs documenting trips that the real me hadn't taken. While I drove actual loads on actual highways, my phantom self was apparently running different routes, hauling different cargo, visiting truck stops and delivery locations I'd never seen, covering more miles in the same number of legal driving hours. The phantom me never got stuck in traffic, never had mechanical problems, never dealt with difficult customers or loading delays. It was like reading about a better version of myself, one who had somehow optimized every aspect of long-haul trucking. But it was also terrifying. Remembered a truck I'd never driven, remembered transactions I'd never made. "Sure, I remember you," a fuel clerk in Wyoming told me, when I called about an entry from 2 days earlier. "You were complaining about the construction on I-80, said it added an hour to your trip, GPS logs, even photos from that trip." But somehow, I'd also been in Wyoming, talking to a fuel clerk about highway construction. The phantom logbook was documenting a parallel existence, a second life where I was driving different routes at the same time I was living my real life. Things got worse when I started finding entries for future dates. According to the black logbook, next Tuesday, I was scheduled to pick up a load of machinery in Detroit and deliver it to Portland. But according to my actual dispatch, I was supposed to be hauling groceries from California to Arizona. I called my dispatcher to ask about the Detroit load. He was confused. There was no Detroit pickup scheduled for me, no machinery shipment, no Portland delivery. But when I gave him the details from the phantom logbook, he found the load in the system. It was assigned to a different driver. "That's Morrison's run," he said. "How did you know about it?" Over the following weeks, the phantom logbook became more detailed, more specific. It started including personal observations that were too accurate to dismiss as coincidence. Notes about truck stops with good coffee, comments about road conditions only a driver would notice, even complaints about specific dispatchers and their habits, complaints that matched my own feelings exactly. The phantom me was developing preferences and opinions that aligned perfectly with the real me. It was like reading a more articulate version of my own thoughts, written by someone who understood trucking from the same perspective I did. But the most disturbing entries were the ones that seemed to bleed through into reality. The phantom logbook mentioned a truck stop in Nevada with the best apple pie west of the Mississippi. I'd never been to that truck stop, but a week later, when my route actually took me through that area, I stopped there out of curiosity. You were right about it being the best. We've had 3 other drivers stop by this week asking for the same slice you ordered, but I'd never been there before. The phantom me had visited, had tried the pie, had apparently recommended it to other drivers, and somehow the real me was getting credit for experiences I'd never had. That's when I realized the Phantom Logbook wasn't just documenting an alternate version of my life. It was creating one. Every entry was becoming reality for someone, somewhere. Every trip logged in the Black Book was being driven by someone, even if it wasn't me. The logbook wasn't recording phantom trips. It was recording trips that were happening, just not to the version of me that was writing in the blue logbook. I tried to stop reading the black logbook, thinking maybe if I ignored it, the phantom trips would stop. But curiosity won out every time. Each morning, I'd check for new entries, and each morning, I'd find more detailed accounts of a trucking life that was more successful, more efficient, more satisfying than my own. The phantom me never got lost, never dealt with difficult customers, never had mechanical breakdowns. The phantom me was living the idealized version of a trucker's life, complete with good weather, cooperative dispatchers, and customers who were always happy to see their deliveries arrive. But reality kept intruding in strange ways. Other drivers started recognizing me at truck stops I'd never visited, thanking me for advice I'd never given, asking about loads I'd never hauled. My reputation was being built by experiences I hadn't had, by a version of myself that was apparently more helpful and more knowledgeable than the real me. The breaking point came when I found an entry in the Phantom Logbook that described a conversation I'd supposedly had with my wife about retiring from trucking. According to the Black Book, I'd called her from a truck stop in Arizona and told her I was ready to come home, ready to find a local job, ready to stop living on the road. But I'd never had that conversation. I wasn't ready to retire, wasn't ready to give up long-haul trucking. The phantom me was making decisions about my life without consulting the real me. That night, I called my wife to ask if she remembered any conversation about me retiring. "Of course I remember," she said. "You called me from Flagstaff last Tuesday, said you were tired of being away from home all the time. We talked for an hour about what kind of local work you might find. But last Tuesday, I'd been in Florida, and I'd never called her from Arizona." The phantom me was having conversations with my wife, making plans for my future, living portions of my life that I would never remember. I threw the black logbook away at the next truck stop, burying it deep in a dumpster behind a diesel fuel island. But the next morning, it was back in my cab, resting in the same storage compartment where I'd first found it. I've stopped trying to get rid of it. The Phantom Logbook is part of my life now, documenting parallel journeys that somehow affect my reality, even though I never experience them directly. Sometimes I think about the phantom me, driving routes I'll never see, talking to people I'll never meet, living a version of trucker life that's more perfect than anything I could achieve on my own. But I also wonder what happens when the phantom me makes decisions the real me wouldn't make, or when the two versions of my life start to conflict in ways that can't be reconciled. Because eventually, I'm going to have to choose which logbook represents the life I actually want to live. And I'm not sure I'll recognize myself in either one. Story 3. I kept seeing the same hitchhiker every 100 miles for 3 days straight. Long-haul trucking is a solitary profession by nature, but you're never really alone out there. There are always other drivers on the road, people at truck stops, dispatchers on the radio. You develop a rhythm, a routine that keeps you connected to the world, even when you're driving through the middle of nowhere. But sometimes the road shows you things that don't fit into any routine. I was running a load from Memphis to Seattle, a route I'd driven probably 50 times over the past decade. It's a good run, mostly interstate, decent truck stops, reliable fuel prices. I knew every mile marker, every rest area, every speed trap between Tennessee and Washington, or at least I thought I did. The first time I saw him, I was about 6 hours out of Memphis, somewhere on I-40 in Arkansas. It was late afternoon, that time of day when the sun starts getting low and casts long shadows across the highway. I was making good time, pushing to reach my planned stop in Oklahoma City, before the driving hours regulations forced me to take my mandatory rest break. He was standing on the shoulder of the highway, thumb out, wearing a red flannel shirt and blue jeans. Nothing unusual about that. You see hitchhikers all the time, especially on the interstate highways. Most truckers don't pick them up anymore. Company policies and insurance liability make it too risky. But this guy caught my attention for a different reason. As I passed him, he turned to watch my truck go by, and I caught a clear look at his face in my side mirror. Middle-aged, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and a thick beard. What struck me was his expression, not disappointed or frustrated like you'd expect from someone who'd just been passed by. He was smiling, not a friendly smile either. Something about it made me check my mirrors more than usual for the next few miles. I forgot about him pretty quickly after that. The road has a way of erasing memories like that. You see thousands of faces, and most of them blend together into a blur of anonymous humanity. I had a schedule to keep, and one random hitchhiker wasn't worth thinking about. But the next day, about 100 miles west of Oklahoma City, I saw him again. Same red flannel shirt, same blue jeans, same position on the shoulder with his thumb out. For a moment, I thought maybe I was confusing him with someone else. A lot of hitchhikers dress similarly, and my memory for faces isn't perfect after driving for 12 hours. But as I passed him, he turned again to watch my truck, and I saw that same unsettling smile in my mirror. That's when I started paying attention. I made a mental note of my odometer reading and the mile markers around where I'd seen him. I also noted the time, 3:17 p.m. If this was the same guy, he'd somehow gotten ahead of me by 100 miles overnight, even though I'd been driving for 6 hours that morning and hadn't seen anyone else on the road who could have given him a ride. The third sighting was what really got under my skin. I was in New Mexico, about halfway between Albuquerque and Flagstaff, when I saw him again. Same spot, relative to my route. About 100 miles from where I'd seen him the day before. Same clothes, same position, same smile when I passed. But this time, something was different. This time, he waved. Not a normal wave, like someone trying to flag down a ride. It was more personal than that, like he was greeting an old friend, like he'd been expecting me. I pulled into the next truck stop and sat in my cab for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. 3 days, 3 sightings, each one exactly 100 miles from the last. Either this guy had access to transportation that was somehow staying ahead of me without being visible on the highway, or something much stranger was happening. I called my dispatcher to check if there had been any reports of problems on the route. Sometimes companies get warnings about suspicious activity or safety concerns. Nothing. I asked a few other drivers at the truck stop if they'd seen anything unusual. Nothing. But that night, as I was trying to sleep in my sleeper berth, I couldn't stop thinking about that wave. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that he'd been expecting to see me specifically. Not just any truck, my truck. The fourth day was when things really went off the rails. I was in Arizona, approaching the California border, when I saw him again. Same position, same clothes, same smile. But this time, instead of just waving as I passed, he stepped into the road. Not all the way into the travel lane, just far enough that I could see him clearly in my headlights. And he was holding something, a sign. I hit my brakes and managed to slow down enough to read it as I passed. In crude black letters on a piece of cardboard, it said, "Thanks for the ride, driver." My blood turned to ice. I'd never given this guy a ride. I'd never even stopped near him. But somehow, he was thanking me for something. I pulled over at the next opportunity and called 911. I told the dispatcher about the man on the highway, how I'd been seeing him for days, how he'd stepped into the road with a sign. The dispatcher was professional but clearly skeptical. She said she'd send a patrol car to check the area, but suggested that maybe I was experiencing fatigue and should consider taking a break. 20 minutes later, a highway patrol officer called me back. He'd driven the stretch of highway I'd described twice and hadn't seen anyone. No hitchhiker, no sign, no evidence that anyone had been on the shoulder recently. I finished my delivery in Los Angeles the next day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I checked my mirrors, I expected to see that red flannel shirt, that unsettling smile. When I stopped for fuel or food, I found myself scanning the parking lot, looking for a face I'd come to dread seeing. The drive back to Memphis was supposed to be the end of it. I was taking a different route, I-10 through the southern states instead of I-40 through the mountains. Different highways, different truck stops, different everything. But on the second day of the return trip, somewhere in West Texas, I saw him again. This time, he wasn't hitchhiking. He was sitting at a picnic table outside a truck stop, eating what looked like a sandwich, watching the parking lot with that same calm smile. When he saw my truck, he raised his hand in that same personal wave, like we were old friends meeting for lunch. I didn't stop. I drove straight through, pushing my driving hours to the legal limit, desperate to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever was happening. But I kept checking my mirrors, and for the next 50 miles, I swore I could see a figure in red flannel walking along the shoulder, always just at the edge of visibility. That was 6 months ago. I've driven that Memphis to Seattle route twice since then, taking different highways each time, varying my schedule, staying at different truck stops. I haven't seen him again, but sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night and the highway stretches empty ahead of me, I catch myself checking the mirrors more than I should, looking for a red flannel shirt, waiting for that wave, because I never figured out what he meant by thanks for the ride. And until I do, I don't think I'll ever feel truly alone on the road again. The worst part is the doubt. Did I really see him 5 times? Or was it 5 different people who happened to dress similarly? Was the sign real? Or was I hallucinating from too much time behind the wheel? I tell myself it was fatigue, stress, the mind playing tricks after too many hours on the highway. But deep down, I know what I saw. And I know that somewhere out there, on some stretch of interstate highway, he's still standing on the shoulder with his thumb out, waiting for the next driver to notice him. Story 4. A truck stop bathroom mirror showed me someone who wasn't there. There are certain truck stops you learn to avoid during a long career on the road. Places with bad food, overpriced fuel, or sketchy parking situations. But the Night Owl Travel Center off I-75 in central Georgia wasn't one of them. It was clean, well lit, had decent coffee, and a good selection of food. The kind of place where you could take a shower, grab a meal, and feel human again after hours behind the wheel. I'd been driving for 11 hours straight when I pulled in that night, hauling a load of furniture from North Carolina to Florida. It was just past midnight, and I was pushing the legal limits of my driving time. But I needed fuel and a quick break before finding somewhere to park for my mandatory rest period. The truck stop was busier than I'd expected for that time of night. Maybe 8 or 9 trucks in the lot, which was about normal. I found a parking spot near the back and walked toward the main building, looking forward to a hot cup of coffee and a few minutes away from the road. Inside, the place had that familiar truck stop atmosphere. Bright fluorescent lights, the smell of fried food, the quiet murmur of tired drivers talking over coffee. Nothing unusual, nothing that would have prepared me for what happened in the bathroom. I've always been particular about using clean facilities on the road, and the Night Owl had a reputation for maintaining their restrooms better than most places. The men's room was at the back of the building, down a short hallway past the showers. As I pushed through the door, I was pleased to see it lived up to its reputation. Clean tiles, working lights, and mirrors that actually reflected clearly instead of showing the warped, stained images you get at some truck stops. There were 3 sinks along the left wall, each with its own mirror, and a row of stalls along the right. I was alone in there, which was fine by me. Sometimes you need a few minutes of solitude to decompress from the road. I used the facilities and went to wash my hands at the middle sink. The mirror in front of me showed exactly what I expected. A tired trucker with 2 days of stubble, eyes a little bloodshot from staring at highway lines, the usual wear and tear of life on the road. I splashed some cold water on my face and ran my hands through my hair, trying to wake myself up enough for the drive to my planned parking spot. That's when I noticed something in the mirror that made me freeze. In the reflection, standing behind me near the door, was another person, a man in work clothes, dark blue shirt, jeans, work boots. He wasn't doing anything threatening, just standing there like he was waiting for something. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. When I turned around to look, there was nobody there. I turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there, clear as day. Middle-aged guy with thinning hair, hands in his pockets, just watching me with an expression I couldn't read. When I turned around again, nothing. My heart was starting to pound, but I tried to rationalize it. Mirrors can play tricks on you, especially when you're tired. The lighting in truck stop bathrooms isn't always great, and after 11 hours of driving, your eyes can start seeing things that aren't there. I dried my hands and decided to get out of there, chalking it up to road fatigue. But as I walked toward the door, I caught a glimpse of the other mirrors out of the corner of my eye. The figure was in all 3 mirrors now. Same man, same clothes, same patient expression, but still nothing when I looked around the actual room. I stood there for a long moment, trying to understand what I was seeing. The logical part of my mind insisted this had to be some kind of optical illusion, maybe something about how the mirrors were positioned or how the light was hitting them. But the primitive part of my brain, the part that had kept my ancestors alive for thousands of years, was screaming at me to get out of there immediately. I compromised by walking to the sink on the far left, the one I hadn't used yet. If this was some kind of reflection from the other mirrors, changing position should change what I was seeing. It didn't. The man was still there in the mirror, but now he was closer, close enough that I could see details. The stubble on his face, the name tag on his shirt that I couldn't quite read, the way his eyes seemed to be focused not just on me, but through me. I reached out with one shaking hand and touched the mirror's surface. The glass was cold, solid, normal, but in the reflection, the man reached out too, and for just a moment, I swear, I could see his hand approaching mine from the other side of the glass. That's when I ran. I burst out of that bathroom like the place was on fire, nearly knocking over another driver who was walking down the hallway. He asked if I was all right, and I mumbled something about not feeling well, then hurried toward the front of the store, but I couldn't leave it alone. As much as every instinct told me to get in my truck and drive away, I had to know if I was losing my mind or if something genuinely strange was happening in that bathroom. I bought a cup of coffee and found a seat where I could watch the hallway. Over the next hour, I saw maybe 6 different drivers go into that bathroom. Every one of them came out looking normal, relaxed, like nothing had happened. No running, no frightened expressions, no sign that they'd seen anything unusual. Finally, I worked up the courage to ask one of them, a guy about my age who looked like he'd been driving as long as I had. "Hey, did you notice anything weird about the mirrors in the men's room?" I tried to ask it casually, like I was just making conversation. He looked at me strangely. "Weird? How?" "I don't know. Maybe like reflections that don't match up with what's actually in the room." He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "Brother, you need to get some sleep. Road can make you see all kinds of things when you're running on fumes." He wasn't wrong about needing sleep, but I wasn't ready to accept that explanation just yet. I decided to try the bathroom one more time, telling myself that if I saw the same thing again, I'd know I wasn't hallucinating. The walk down that hallway was one of the longest of my life. Every step felt like I was walking toward something I shouldn't see, something that shouldn't exist, but I had to know. The bathroom was empty when I pushed through the door. I went straight to the middle sink, the one I'd started at, and looked in the mirror. Just me, tired, scared looking, but just me. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Road fatigue, just like the other driver had said. Too much coffee, too many hours, too much time alone with my thoughts. I laughed at myself and turned on the water to wash my hands again. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Not in the mirror this time. Actual footsteps. The sound of work boots on tile. I spun around, and there he was. The same man I'd been seeing in the reflections, standing by the door just like in the mirror. Real, solid, casting a shadow on the floor. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. He didn't look threatening, exactly, but there was something about his presence that filled me with a deep, primal dread. His mouth opened like he was about to speak, and I saw that his teeth were too white, too perfect, like they weren't quite real. "You can see me now," he said, and his voice had an echo to it, like it was coming from somewhere far away. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare. This couldn't be happening. People don't just appear in bathroom mirrors and then step into reality. But he was standing there, as solid as anything I'd ever seen. I've been waiting for someone who could see me, he continued. It gets lonely, you know, being here but not here, watching but not being able to interact. What are you? I managed to croak out. He smiled, and that perfect smile was somehow worse than if he'd looked angry or threatening. I used to drive trucks too, long time ago, had an accident not far from here. Sometimes I still think I'm out there on the road, looking for a place to stop, a place to rest. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. I realized I could see my breath when I exhaled. But you can see me, he said again, taking a step closer. That means you could help me find my way back to the road. I didn't wait to hear more. I ran for the door, pushed past him, and felt nothing. My hand went right through him like he was made of air, but I could still hear his voice behind me as I fled. I'll be waiting for you next time you need to stop. Next time you look in a mirror. I got in my truck and drove without stopping for the rest of my legal driving hours, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the Night Owl Travel Center. I've never been back there, and I never will. But he was right about one thing. Sometimes, when I'm using the bathroom at other truck stops, I catch glimpses in the mirror that don't belong. A figure standing behind me when the room is empty. Work boots where there should be empty space. And always, always, that too perfect smile. I've started avoiding mirrors when I can. It's surprisingly hard to do when you're a truck driver. Mirrors are everywhere, an essential part of the job. But I've learned to focus on just what I need to see, to avoid lingering looks that might show me things I don't want to see. Because I'm pretty sure he's still looking for help, finding his way back to the road. And I'm afraid that one of these days, he's going to ask me for a ride. Story 5. I started hearing my dead brother's voice on the CB radio. Family is complicated when you're a long-haul trucker. You spend weeks away from home, miss birthdays and holidays, communicate mostly through brief phone calls from truck stops. But blood is blood, and some bonds survive even the loneliness of life on the road. My brother Tommy had been gone for 8 months when I first heard his voice on Channel 19. Tommy wasn't a trucker. He'd been a construction foreman, worked local jobs, went home to his wife and kids every night, but he understood the road in his own way. When I'd call him from some truck stop in the middle of nowhere, feeling isolated and disconnected from the world, he always knew the right thing to say. He had a way of making 300 miles feel like 3 blocks. The heart attack took him at 42. No warning, no chance to say goodbye. One day we're planning to meet up when I got back from a West Coast run. The next day I'm driving through the night to get home for his funeral. I'd been struggling with his death more than I wanted to admit. Out there on the highway, with nothing but time to think, I kept replaying our last conversation, kept wondering if there were things I should have said or done differently. The isolation that had always been manageable before suddenly felt crushing. I was running a load from Portland to Kansas City, somewhere on I-84 through eastern Oregon, when it happened. It was late, probably around 2 a.m., and Channel 19 had been quiet for hours. That stretch of highway can be brutal for loneliness, mile after mile of nothing but sagebrush and darkness, with truck stops sometimes 100 miles apart. I was fighting to stay awake, drinking my 4th cup of coffee, when a familiar voice came through the CB speaker. "Hey there, big brother. How you holding up out there?" I nearly drove off the road. The voice was unmistakably Tommy's. Same accent, same inflection, same way of calling me big brother, even though he was only 2 years younger. But Tommy had been dead for 8 months. I grabbed the CB mic with shaking hands. Who is this? There was a pause, then laughter. Tommy's laughter. The same laugh I'd heard 1,000 times growing up. The same laugh that had gotten us both in trouble when we were kids, trying not to wake our parents. Come on, man. You know who it is. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. My rational mind was insisting this had to be someone playing a cruel joke, but the voice was too perfect. Not just the sound of it, but the way he spoke, the rhythm of his words, even the way he breathed between sentences. Nobody could fake that level of detail. Tommy, I whispered into the mic. There you go. Took you long enough to answer. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what was happening. The logical part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible, that dead people don't talk on CB radios. But the emotional part, the part that had been grieving for months, wanted desperately to believe. How is this possible? I asked. Hell, if I know, brother. One day I'm gone. Next thing I know, I can hear you out there on the radio. Took me forever to figure out how to talk back. The voice was coming through crystal clear, clearer than most CB transmissions. Usually there's static, distortion, interference from other signals. But Tommy's voice sounded like he was sitting right there in the cab with me. I miss you, I said, and immediately felt foolish for talking to what had to be a hallucination. I miss you too, man, but I'm worried about you. That stopped me cold. How could a hallucination know that I'd been skipping meals, drinking too much coffee, pushing my driving hours to the legal limit to avoid spending too much time alone with my thoughts? I'm fine, I lied. No, you're not. You're running yourself into the ground. When's the last time you went home? Really home, not just to drop a load and pick up another one. He was right, and we both knew it. I'd been taking longer runs, more difficult schedules, anything to keep moving and avoid the quiet moments when grief could catch up with me. I don't know what to do without you, I admitted. Same thing you did before, brother. Keep moving forward. Take care of yourself. Don't let my dying be the thing that kills you too. We talked for another hour as I drove through the Oregon darkness. He told me about watching over his kids, about how proud he was of the man his oldest boy was becoming. But as the conversation went on, I started noticing things that didn't feel quite right. He mentioned places I'd been that I'd never told him about. He knew details about my recent trips, about conversations I'd had with other drivers, about problems with my truck that I hadn't shared with anyone. When I pointed this out, he was quiet for a long moment. Distance works different when you're dead, he finally said. I can see more than I could before, hear more, know more. What do you mean? I mean I can see you, brother, right now, driving through the dark, scared and lonely, and trying to pretend you're not falling apart. A chill ran down my spine. I checked my mirrors, looked around the cab, but I was alone. Yet somehow, Tommy could see me. Look in your rearview mirror. His voice came through the CB. I did, and for just a moment, I swear I saw him sitting in the passenger seat. Not clearly, more like a reflection in water, wavering and indistinct, but unmistakably Tommy. Same face, same build, even wearing the flannel shirt he'd always favored. When I turned to look directly, there was nothing there, but the impression lingered, the sense that I wasn't alone anymore. Over the next few weeks, Tommy's voice became a regular presence on my CB radio, always late at night, always when I was alone on some empty stretch of highway. We'd talk about everything and nothing. Family memories, current events, my plans for the future. He knew things he shouldn't have been able to know. Details about my mother's health that she hadn't told anyone. Information about changes at my trucking company that hadn't been announced yet. Names and faces of people I met on the road. Sometimes he'd warn me about things. Bad weather ahead, construction delays, speed traps. His information was always accurate, always helpful. It was like having a guardian angel who happened to be my dead brother. But there was a price for these conversations. I started isolating myself even more, turning down invitations from other drivers, avoiding social situations where I couldn't hear the CB clearly. I became dependent on Tommy's voice, addicted to the comfort of talking to him. Real relationships started to feel shallow by comparison. Other drivers started commenting on my behavior. They'd ask who I'd been talking to for hours when the radio had been silent. That's when I realized that other people couldn't hear Tommy's voice, only me. The revelation should have convinced me that I was having some kind of psychological breakdown, that grief had driven me to create elaborate auditory hallucinations. But the voice was too real, too detailed, too consistent, and the information Tommy provided was too accurate to be coming from my imagination. The breaking point came on a run from Denver to Dallas. I was driving through the Texas Panhandle in the middle of the night when Tommy's voice came through the CB, more urgent than I'd ever heard it. "Brother, you need to pull over right now. Get off the highway. What's wrong? There's going to be an accident about 5 miles ahead. Multi-car plop. If you don't stop now, you're going to be part of it." I could hear the fear in his voice, something I'd rarely heard when he was alive. Tommy had always been the calm one, the voice of reason in crisis situations. I took the next exit and pulled into a truck stop, parking where I could see the highway. About 20 minutes later, I saw the emergency vehicles racing past. Ambulances, fire trucks, state police. The accident Tommy had warned me about was real. But that's when I started to understand the true nature of what was happening. When I got back on the road the next morning, I heard the news reports about the pileup. 7 vehicles involved, 3 fatalities. The accident had happened exactly where and when Tommy said it would. But according to the Highway Patrol investigation, it had been caused by a truck driver who fell asleep at the wheel. A truck driver who matched my description, driving a rig similar to mine. I sat in my cab at the next truck stop, staring at the CB radio, finally understanding what Tommy had been trying to tell me. The warning hadn't been about an accident I would witness or be injured in. It had been about an accident I would cause. The isolation, the lack of sleep, the emotional stress of grief. I was becoming a danger to myself and everyone else on the road, and somehow Tommy knew it. Whether he was real or a manifestation of my subconscious mind, he was trying to save me from myself. That night, I called my dispatcher and told him I needed time off. I drove home, really home, for the first time in months. I saw doctors, talked to counselors, spent time with family and friends who existed in the real world instead of on CB radio frequencies. It's been 3 months since I heard Tommy's voice. I'm back on the road now, but with a better understanding of my limitations, a better support network, and a promise to myself to never again let grief isolate me from the world of the living. Sometimes, late at night, on empty highways, I find myself hoping to hear that familiar voice one more time. But I think Tommy served his purpose. He kept me company when I needed it most, and then he helped me find my way back to life. Whether he was real or not doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that he saved me from following him too soon. Story 6. I picked up a hitchhiker who knew everything about my route before I told him. Company policy strictly forbids picking up hitchhikers. Liability issues, insurance concerns, safety protocols. There are a dozen good reasons why professional drivers aren't supposed to give rides to strangers. But sometimes, on a lonely highway in the middle of nowhere, policy seems less important than basic human decency. I'd been driving for 14 hours straight, pushing the legal limits to make up time after a delayed pickup in Phoenix. It was one of those brutally hot Arizona summer days when the asphalt shimmers like water and the desert stretches empty in every direction. I was running low on driving hours and needed to find a place to park for my mandatory rest break. But the next truck stop was still 40 miles ahead. That's when I saw him standing on the shoulder of I-10, thumb out, wearing clothes that looked completely inappropriate for the desert heat. Dark pants, long-sleeved shirt, heavy boots, the kind of outfit you'd wear in winter. Not in 115-degree Arizona sunshine. As a rule, I don't pick up hitchhikers. Too many risks, too many variables, too many things that can go wrong. But something about this guy made me reconsider. Maybe it was the way he stood there, completely motionless, not even trying to flag down traffic. Maybe it was the fact that he didn't seem to be sweating despite the brutal heat. Or maybe it was just that he looked like he belonged there, like he was part of the landscape. I drove past him, but something made me check my mirrors. He was watching my truck disappear down the highway, and even from that distance, I could see he was smiling. Not the disappointed expression you'd expect from someone who'd just been passed by, but a knowing smile, like he'd expected exactly what had happened. That smile bothered me. I couldn't stop thinking about it as I drove toward the truck stop. Why would someone smile after being passed by unless they knew something I didn't? 5 miles later, I saw him again. Same guy, same clothes, same position on the shoulder, standing in exactly the same pose, thumb out, facing traffic. But there was no way he could have gotten ahead of me. I'd been doing 75. There were no side roads, no other traffic that could have given him a ride. This time, I pulled over. He walked to the passenger side of my cab with unhurried steps, moving like someone who had all the time in the world. When I rolled down the window, I got my first good look at his face. Middle-aged, weathered, but not old, with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Appreciate the ride, driver," he said, climbing into the passenger seat without waiting for an invitation. "Name's Carl." "How did you get ahead of me?" I asked as he settled in. "I passed you 5 miles back." He shrugged. "Desert roads can be tricky. Sometimes the straight line isn't the fastest path." That didn't make any sense. But before I could question him further, he was already making himself comfortable, adjusting the seat, looking around the cab with the casual interest of someone who'd ridden in plenty of trucks before. "You're heading to El Paso, right?" he said, "carrying electronics for that distribution center off I-10. I felt a chill despite the desert heat. I hadn't mentioned my destination or my cargo. The only visible identification on my trailer was the trucking company name. Nothing about what I was hauling or where I was going. "How do you know that? Lucky guess." He smiled again, and this time I could see something unsettling in that expression. "You've got that El Paso look about you. Been driving this route long. Few years." I said carefully. What about you? Where are you headed? Same place you are. Always am. Before I could ask what he meant by that, he was pointing ahead to where the highway curved around a low hill. You'll want to stay in the right lane around this bend, he said. Construction crew has the left lane blocked about 2 miles ahead. Save you some time if you merge now. I hadn't seen any construction signs, but I moved to the right lane anyway. Sure enough, just past the curve, there was a line of orange cones and a crew working on the highway. Traffic was backing up in the left lane while the right lane flowed freely. Thanks for the heads up, I said. How did you know about the construction? I keep my eyes open. He was looking out the side window at the desert landscape, but something about his posture suggested he was seeing more than sand and cacti. This is beautiful country if you know how to look at it. Over the next hour, Carl provided information that should have been impossible for a hitchhiker to know. He warned me about a speed trap near Tucson before I could see the police car hidden behind an overpass. He told me which truck stop had the cheapest diesel fuel 20 miles before we reached it. He even mentioned that the eastbound way station was closed for maintenance. Information I was able to confirm on the CB radio. But what really unsettled me was how much he knew about me personally. You've got family in Ohio, he said out of nowhere as we passed through the outskirts of Tucson. I hadn't mentioned Ohio. My license plates were from North Carolina. My truck was registered in Tennessee, and I'd picked him up in Arizona. There was no reason for him to know about my family, sister and her kids, right? Haven't seen them in a while. He was right. I had a sister in Cleveland with 2 kids, and I hadn't visited in over a year, but I'd never told him that. How do you know about my family? You've got that look, he said again, the look of a man carrying guilt about not being there for the people who matter. That hit too close to home. I had been feeling guilty about not visiting, about choosing profitable long-haul runs over shorter routes that would take me closer to family. It's not easy, this life, Carl continued. Always moving, always between places, never really belonging anywhere, but it serves a purpose. What purpose depends on the driver. Some are running from something. Some are looking for something. Some are just trying to disappear. He turned to look at me directly for the first time since getting in the truck. Which one are you? I didn't have an answer for that, partly because I wasn't sure myself, and partly because his eyes were making me deeply uncomfortable. They were ordinary brown eyes, but they seemed to hold knowledge that no hitchhiker should possess. Maybe a little of all three, I finally admitted. That's honest. I respect honest drivers. As we approached El Paso, Carl's behavior became even stranger. He started giving me directions to the distribution center where I was supposed to make my delivery. Directions I hadn't asked for to a location I hadn't told him about. Take exit 26, he said as we entered the city. The distribution center is about 3 miles south. They'll be expecting you at Dock 7. I was scheduled for Dock 7, but that information was only in my paperwork. There was no way he could have known that detail. Left at the second light, then right into the industrial park, building with the blue stripe. His directions were perfect. I'd never been to this particular distribution center, but Carl guided me there like he'd made the trip 100 times. When we pulled into the parking lot, he pointed to an open dock door. Dock 7, he said, right on time. I parked the truck and turned to ask Carl how he'd known all these details, but the passenger seat was empty. He was gone, with no sound of a door opening, no indication of how or when he'd left the cab. I climbed down and walked around the truck, thinking maybe he'd slipped out while I was focused on parking. But there was no sign of him anywhere in the lot. No figure walking away. No trace that he'd ever been there. The receiving clerk at the dock confirmed my delivery appointment and directed me to Dock 7, exactly as Carl had predicted. While they were unloading my trailer, I asked the clerk if he'd seen the man who'd been riding with me. What man? You drove in alone, driver. I insisted that there had been a passenger in my cab, but the clerk just gave me the kind of look you give someone who's been on the road too long. Later, as I was completing my paperwork, I mentioned the incident to another driver who was making a pickup at the same facility. He listened to my description of Carl and nodded knowingly. Sounds like you met the passenger, he said. Lot of drivers have stories about him. Guy who knows things he shouldn't know, appears on desert highways when drivers need guidance. Who is he? Nobody knows for sure. Some say he's the ghost of a driver who died out there years ago, still trying to help people find their way. Others think he's something else entirely. But every story is the same. He knows your route, knows your cargo, knows things about your life that you never told him. The driver leaned closer and lowered his voice. The thing is, everyone who picks him up makes their delivery safely, every time, even when there should be problems. Weather, traffic, mechanical issues, everything works out perfectly. I thought about my trip from Phoenix to El Paso, the construction warning that had saved me time, the speed trap alert that had prevented a ticket, the fuel stop recommendation that had saved me money, Carl's guidance to the exact dock where I was expected. Everything had gone perfectly, too perfectly. So he's helpful, I said. Yeah, he's helpful, but helpful doesn't always mean safe. Because the question isn't whether he helps you complete your current run. The question is what he wants in return. I never saw Carl again, but I've thought about him on every trip since then, especially when I'm driving alone through the desert, wondering if that figure on the horizon might be more than just a mirage. Because now I understand that some rides come with a price that isn't paid immediately. Some passengers know exactly where you're going because they've been waiting there for you all along. And sometimes the person offering to help you find your way is the one who's been guiding you toward a destination you never chose.